In Chapter 2, we looked at the food guidelines that are available to help us plan a healthy diet. In Chapter 3, we're going to take a look at what actually happens to the food in the body once we actually decide to select them. No matter what food you actually do select, it basically has the same entry and exit point through our GI tract. So let's take a look at our GI tract itself, or also referred to as the digestive tract. On average, it's about 20 to 26 feet in length, and it's going to vary depending on the individual. And it encompasses everything from the entry point, which is the mouth, to the exit point, which is the anus. The foods that we consume need to be broken down for your body to be able to utilize the individual nutrients. And there are two processes which are important for this function to occur. And these include digestion as well as absorption. Digestion, very simply, is defined as the breakdown of nutrient molecules to the usable forms that our cells can then utilize. It includes both what are known as mechanical, also referred to as muscular, and chemical processes. And we're going to take a look at the difference between these two. The other definition is absorption, which is the actual uptake of the individual nutrients by the cells. This is going to occur predominantly in the small intestine, where they will then be transported from either through the bloodstream or through the lymphatic system. Looking at this visual, which corresponds with figure 3-1 in your text, you can actually follow the path of the entire GI tract. Take a moment just to review the makeup of the GI tract itself, noticing the many organs, sphincters, as well as what we refer to as accessory organs that are involved in the digestive and absorptive process. Taking a closer look at the different steps involved in digestion and absorption, we'll start at the entry point, which would be the mouth. What happens with the mouth is you select your food that you are going to consume, you chew it, and it mixes with saliva. The saliva is being synthesized through your salivary glands, and the combination of the two produces what's known as a bolus. And a definition of a bolus is simply the portion of food swallowed at one time. So you've produced the bolus and you take a swallow. That bolus then slides down the esophagus just momentarily before it enters into the stomach. Here the bolus is churned, digestive juices are added to become what is known as chyme. And you can see chyme is defined as a semi-liquid mass of partially digested food. From here, the chyme is going to enter down into the small intestine. And the small intestine is divided into three areas. There is the upper third, which is the duodenum, the middle third, which is the jejunum, and the lower third, which is the ileum. Now, the small intestine, as we go further, you will see is the major area of absorption for the majority of the nutrients. The next stop along the GI tract is the colon, also referred to as the large intestine. Now, the majority of nutrients have already been absorbed in the small intestine, so what's left? Well, this is where you will find minerals being absorbed. Water will also be absorbed in the large intestine itself. Any type of undigested waste will also continue to travel through the colon down to the last stop, which is the rectum. This is where any undigested waste, any semi-solid waste will be held until it will finally be eliminated through the anus. So as I mentioned previously, the digestive process involves both what are known as muscular or mechanical actions as well as chemical actions. We're going to take a look first at those muscular or those mechanical actions which are necessary to aid the digestive process. And once again, we're going to start back at the very top at the entry point, which is the mouth. If you think about the chewing process itself, it is muscular or mechanical in nature. As you're chewing, you're reducing the food to a type of a liquid form. Remember that those contents are going to mix together with the saliva, ultimately forming the bolus. But that entry point is going to involve a muscular or a mechanical action. The second mechanical action to note is what is known as peristalsis. And peristalsis is defined as wave-like muscular contractions of the GI tract that push its contents along. Now, peristalsis occurs in two different areas. It occurs, however, to a lesser extent in the first area, which is the esophagus. That bolus, once it's swallowed, actually goes through a peristalsis type of a process where the bolus is pushed forward. Also in the small intestine, the same type of a process occurs, and we'll take a look at that in just a minute in more detail. The third muscular or mechanical action of digestion has to do with the stomach itself. The anatomy of the stomach is such that it can hold on to the chyme for an extremely long period of time until it is completely liquefied and can move into the small intestine. The chyme, made up of obviously the different nutrients, can stay in the stomach anywhere from about 2 to 5 hours. And what determines the emptying time has to do with what's the proportion of the macronutrients or the energy yielding nutrients. How much carbohydrate is present, how much fat is present, or how much protein is present. The stomach has the thickest walls and strongest muscles of all of the GI tract organs. In addition to both circular and longitudinal muscles, it has a third layer. These are known as the diagonal muscles, and they alternately contract and relax, which plays a very large role into chyme movement. These three sets of muscles work continuously to force the chyme downward. As it's pushed downward, it allows for continuous churning and addition of secretions to completely liquefy the chyme before it moves off into the small intestine. The next muscular or mechanical action of digestion is what is known as segmentation. This occurs within the small intestine, and it involves a squeezing action by the muscles within the intestine themselves, which allows for a backward and forward motion of the chyme. It allows the chyme to be mixed with digestive juices as well as enzymes, which then allow the nutrients to be absorbed. The last muscular action to note are what are referred to as sphincter contractions. And these sphincter contractions consist of a coordinated opening and closing of certain areas along the GI tract. This coordinated opening and closing allows for the contents of the GI tract to move forward. The first sphincter to note is the upper esophageal sphincter, and this opens in response to swallowing. So this is what allows the bolus, which is created in the mouth, to slide through the esophagus down into the stomach. However, before the bolus can enter into the stomach, it has to pass through the lower esophageal sphincter. Once then the bolus enters into the stomach, where it will become chyme, before that chyme can move on to the small intestine, it has to go through the pyloric sphincter. Then from the pyloric sphincter, we need to go through the ileocecal sphincter, which will be then between the small intestine and the large intestine. And then the last sphincter is the anus, which holds on to the waste product until it is eliminated. If you take a look at this slide, you get a much better visual for the two muscular actions of peristalsis and segmentation. Both rely on the circular muscles and longitudinal muscles that are present in the small intestine. As you can see, peristalsis strictly moves the chyme forward, whereas segmentation allows for a more backwards and forward type of motion. Both of these actions allow for maximum absorption of nutrients. So those were the mechanical or muscular actions involved in digestion. The other type that I mentioned are the chemical processes, and these involve specifically secretions. These secretions are necessary to break down the food that we're consuming to very small units, which can then ultimately be absorbed. So what are secretions? Secretions are simply enzymes plus water. And if you remember what an enzyme is from chemistry or another class, enzymes are simply proteins. They're protein molecules that facilitate or act as a catalyst for a chemical reaction. We're going to take a look at 5 different organs and or glands that produce these necessary secretions that are involved in the digestive process. So in the GI tract, we're back again at the entry point. In your mouth, there are salivary glands, and salivary glands contain salivary amylase. This is the secretion which is required to start the breakdown of carbohydrate, or most specifically starch molecules. The second gland to note, these are our gastric glands, and they produce what's known as gastric juice. Contained within this gastric juice, there are specific enzymes which are known as proteases, and proteases are necessary to break down protein. Then we have our intestinal glands, and they contain secretion which is known as intestinal juice. This intestinal juice contains specifically enzymes which are known as carbohydrases, and these are responsible for breaking down carbohydrate. Then we have an accessory organ which is involved, which is known as our liver. The liver produces bile. Now, bile is necessary to be able to emulsify fat, and we'll talk about that process in Chapter 5. But bile emulsifies fat, so enzymes that are present can then break it down. And these enzymes, which are involved in fat breakdown, are known as lipases. Then lastly, we have the pancreas. The pancreas produces pancreatic juice. This juice comes in from the small intestine, or flows into the small intestine, and allows for the breakdown of protein because of the presence of protease enzymes, as well as the breakdown of carbohydrate and fat. As a general overview, take a look at this slide, which corresponds with figure 3.7 in your book. It summarizes digestion through the GI tract. And if you note the graph on the right-hand side of the figure, the digestion of the energy nutrients begins in different parts of the GI tract, but all are ready for absorption by the time they reach the small intestine. What we're going to take a look at next is why does so much absorption take place in the small intestine? What is present? What does the anatomy have to do with it? What truly is the reason why our nutrients are being absorbed in this area? So the small intestine is the primary site of nutrient absorption, with the majority taking place in the upper 2/3, which are the duodenum as well as the jejunum. The average length of the small intestine is about 10 to 15 feet. Once again, it really is going to vary depending upon the individual. But if you consider that the entire length of the GI tract is about 20 to 26 feet, you could see where the small intestine, in some cases, can make up about 50% of the entire GI tract itself. So just think about how much surface area that is, which can help to explain why there's so much absorption that takes place. But it's really the anatomy of the small intestine which comes into play. The small intestine is defined as a flexible tube which has multiple folds on the inner portion. Each one of those folds has what are known as villi, and those are defined as finger-like projections. Each one of those villi have even smaller projections on each and every one of those, and these are referred to as the microvilli. So let's visualize this concept. There are multiple folds on the inner surface of the small intestine. These folds are covered with villi. Each one of these villi has even smaller projections upon them, which are the microvilli. These microvilli are in constant motion, and as nutrients pass by, they actually get trapped down between each one of those microvilli. Where can they go from there? Well, there's really not much choice at this point. At this point, they end up getting trapped and they're going to be absorbed. They're going to cross the cell membrane and eventually enter either into our bloodstream or our lymphatic system, which are the circulatory systems involved in nutrient transport. So nutrients end up getting trapped in the microvilli and they eventually are going to cross the cell membrane. However, depending on what the nutrient is, determines the method by which they can cross the cell membrane. There are 3 different transport mechanisms. They involve, first of all, simple diffusion. This is where water and very small lipids or very small fats can cross the intestinal cells very, very easily. Then there is facilitated diffusion, which requires specific carriers. Specific carriers have to pick up certain nutrients. They include the water-soluble vitamins. Once they pick up their nutrient, they can then take it across the cell membrane for absorption. The third method is known as active transport, which is more complicated. Besides needing a specific carrier to take the nutrient across, it also requires energy. And the nutrients which require active transport include both glucose as well as amino acids. Take a few minutes just to look at this particular slide, which gives you a really good visual of those absorptive processes of simple diffusion, facilitated diffusion, as well as active transport. So nutrients have now been digested and absorbed. They have crossed the small intestine cell membrane through either simple diffusion, facilitated diffusion, or active transport. Now what? Well, depending on the nutrient is going to determine what transport system it will circulate through. It will either enter into the bloodstream or the lymphatic system. Water-soluble nutrients are able to be directly absorbed into the bloodstream. Once they're into the bloodstream, they will move on to the liver, and the liver will actually direct where their eventual destination will be. So what are these water-soluble nutrients? Well, they include, first of all, carbohydrates, specifically carbohydrates that have been broken down into monosaccharides. Then lipids, or very small fats. These would include glycerol as well as short chain and medium chain fatty acids. Then proteins, broken down to amino acids, can enter directly into the bloodstream, as well as the vitamins, which are categorized as being B vitamins as well as vitamin C. Minerals are another category that can be directly sent into the bloodstream for distribution. Fat-soluble nutrients have to enter into another system before they can enter into the bloodstream, and this system is known as the lymphatic system. The nutrients which have to go through the lymphatic system first include large lipids or large fats. things like long-chain fatty acids as well as monoglycerides. Then other types of fat, triglycerides, cholesterol, phospholipids, as well as vitamins A, D, E, and K. These vitamins are referred to as fat-soluble vitamins. All of these, before they can enter into the bloodstream, have to go through the lymphatic system first. So the water-soluble nutrients, as I mentioned, can go directly into the bloodstream. This is also referred to as the vascular system. Very simply, it's a closed system of vessels in which our blood is continuously flowing. All of our body tissues and cells obtain nutrients as well as oxygen from the blood, and they also deposit any carbon dioxide or waste products back into the blood for them to be disposed of. Now, the heart is the pump for this entire system, and the typical route of the blood to flow includes from the heart to the arteries, to the capillaries, to the veins, and back to the heart. So let's take a look at this continuously flowing vascular system. And what we're going to see is that it truly does begin and end with the heart. Every contraction of the heart launches blood off throughout the whole entire system. So if we look at this diagram here, and if you just note where number 1 is located, that's our starting point basically. The blood is going to leave the right side of the heart through the pulmonary artery. From this artery, this blood is going to end up going through our lungs. What happens to it in the lungs? Well, the blood is going to lose any carbon dioxide, and along with the carbon dioxide being lost, it's going to pick up oxygen. So now you're going to have this freshly oxygenated blood ready to go throughout the entire body. So this freshly oxygenated blood is going to come back down into the heart once again. It's going to enter into the left side of the heart. Then as the heart contracts, the blood is going to leave once again the left side of the heart through the aorta. Once it enters into the aorta, it's going to go into one of 3 directions. This freshly oxygenated blood is either going to go up to our upper body, it's going to go down to our lower body, or it's going to go through our digestive tract. In the digestive tract, remember all of those nutrients which are now absorbed? They cross the cell membrane. They are now ready to move on and be distributed. So the digestive tract is going to send these water-soluble nutrients into the bloodstream via the liver. Remember also that fat-soluble vitamins, however, cannot enter directly into the bloodstream. What you're going to see on this diagram here is that the lymphatic system works along with the digestive tract. The fat-soluble nutrients will enter the lymphatic system through the digestive tract and then eventually merge into the bloodstream at a point near the heart. Once those fat-soluble vitamins then enter into the bloodstream, they can now be distributed throughout the entire body. Within the vascular system, you could see that the liver plays a major metabolic role in nutrient transport. The liver receives the nutrients that are absorbed from the GI tract and then prepares them for use by other areas of the body. Another important function of the liver is that it detoxifies harmful substances and then allows for their excretion. We're going to see when we go into chapter 7 just how important the liver is, and in fact it is referred as being the most metabolically active organ. We looked at the vascular system or the bloodstream and how it relies on the heart as a pump regulation. Because of this system, water-soluble nutrients can be distributed throughout the entire body. But the fat-soluble nutrients, if you recall, go into the lymphatic system before they can enter into the bloodstream. The lymphatic system is considered to be a one-way route for fluids from the tissues to enter eventually into the bloodstream. What is lymph? Well, if you were to actually look at it, it's clear, it has type of a yellowish tinge to it. It's similar to blood, but it contains no red blood cells. This fluid actually collects between cells and then eventually will collect into tiny vessels. The lymphatic fluid can move from one area to another simply as we move, or as our muscles contract, or as we breathe. Eventually, the lymphatic fluid is going to collect in the thoracic duct and it's going to enter into the bloodstream through the subclavian vein. This is how those fat-soluble nutrients eventually can get into the bloodstream to circulate. Take a look again at this particular slide, which gives us an overview of the flow of the vascular system. However, what you're going to note is what's highlighted there is number 7. This is the point where the lymphatic system can enter into the flow of the vascular system itself. Much of the lymph is going to collect in the area known as the thoracic duct, which is behind the heart. The thoracic duct then opens into the subclavian vein where the lymphatic fluid can then enter into the bloodstream, once again depositing those fat-soluble nutrients which can then travel to the cells and the tissues. While the majority of nutrients which are obtained from the digestive process are absorbed, there are some which do remain either undigested or unabsorbed. So what happens to those? Within the body, there are certain excretory systems which allow for such substances to be disposed of. Some common unabsorbed substances can include fiber, unabsorbed minerals, as well as fatty acids. Our body can get rid of them or eliminate them through the feces. Then we can also have the byproducts, often of metabolic breakdown, which include carbon dioxide, water, as well as nitrogen. Our lungs, our skin, and our kidneys are able to excrete those. And then lastly, urea. Urea is a byproduct of protein breakdown, and that is a substance which, if it builds up, can really have detrimental effects within the body. We're going to discuss this much more so in Chapter 6. This urea, which needs to be disposed of, can be done through the kidneys. Thinking about everything your GI tract can do can really be rather amazing. Recently, research has shown that our GI tract doesn't just work on its own, however. It's home to about 100 trillion microbes or microorganisms. These are often referred to as GI microbiota, or collectively as our microbiome. There are many benefits of having a healthy microbiome that have been identified, and they include it can help to reduce inflammation, can help regulate our appetite, help to make us full or provide us with a feeling of satiety, play a role in weight maintenance, enhanced immune function, control of blood cholesterol, control of blood pressure, so on and so forth. It's also been shown that some of these microbes have the capability of producing some B vitamins as well as vitamin K. And when we examine chapters 10 and 11, which take us through water-soluble and fat-soluble vitamins, you'll see what's actually involved there. While simply taking a probiotic supplement or a prebiotic supplement is an option to help our microbiome thrive, results as far as their effectiveness are inconclusive. However, incorporating actual foods can be beneficial. Food sources that can provide us with prebiotics. Prebiotics are what encourage microbial growth. These food sources can include garlic, leeks, onions, artichokes, asparagus, honey, bananas, as well as legumes. Then there's the category of probiotics. And probiotics are the actual live microbes which are already present in certain foods. They can be found in things like yogurt, dark chocolate, sauerkraut, beer, wine, pickles, kimchi, kombucha, as well as green olives. Making these type of food sources can potentially have an impact on keeping our microbiome very healthy. So here's to some healthy feeding of your gut.